Sean Vincent Gillis wasn't the guy you'd stop and chat with on the street, or even make eye contact with if you could help it. He was just another loner in Baton Rouge, glued to his computer and giving his neighbors the full-blown creeps. But what no one could have guessed was that Sean wasn't just weird. He was a full-blown nightmare, one so twisted he made the other area serial killers look like they were still on training wheels. In this episode, we're peeling back the layers of how a guy who started as your standard garden variety creep turned into a monster who left a trail of death behind him. We're talking peeping toms, tire tracks, DNA evidence, and a hard drive so disturbing it could make your stomach turn. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a reminder that sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask. It just sits there, hiding in plain sight, hoping no one notices. Before we dive into the story, if you're into brief and bingeable true crime, you've found your home here. I drop at least 2 episodes per week, so hit the follow button now. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder. On May 27, 2003, Derek Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge killer, was finally in cuffs. Cue the collective sigh of relief from Baton Rouge. The boogeyman was behind bars, and surely the nightmare was over. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast, because even with the prime suspect tucked away in jail, the killings did not stop. As you can imagine, there was probably a collective facepalm among the investigators when they realized, hey, wait a second, these other murders? Yeah, they don't match Lee's MO at all. Then came the moment every true crime junkie lives for, and every investigator dreads, the horrifying realization that Baton Rouge wasn't dealing with just one monster. There was another predator stalking the streets. This revelation sent them straight into the orbit of Sean Vincent Gillis, a man who would make Derek Todd Lee look almost ordinary, but not quite. Sean Vincent Gillis entered the world in Baton Rouge in 1962, and chaos was already waiting for him, arms wide open. His father, Norman, was no stranger to instability. Mental illness and alcoholism had him in a chokehold. But these things really escalated shortly after Sean was born. In what can only be described as a true what-the-hell moment, Norman pulled a gun during an argument with his wife, Yvonne. The target? Not her, not himself. No, it was baby Sean. Thankfully, no one was physically hurt during this domestic horror show, but Yvonne got the wake-up call that she needed. Norman was a clear and present danger. So Norman packed his bags, or maybe he just slithered out the door, and Yvonne became a single mom, raising Sean with help from her parents. Yvonne really held things down for a while, keeping a steady job at the local news station and doing her best to give Sean a normal life. On paper, it looked like she was thriving. He was polite, earned good grades, had friends, gold star for parenting, right? Well, maybe. Or maybe Yvonne just didn't see the storm clouds gathering inside her son. The neighbors and school friends, however, were a little less oblivious. According to them, Sean was running with a group of kids, dabbling in devil worship. That's not exactly the kind of extracurricular you'd put on a college application. And then there was the garbage can incident. At 3 a.m. one night, Sean's neighbor, Carolyn, was jolted awake by a racket outside. There stood Sean, pounding on garbage cans like he was auditioning for Blink-182. Carolyn would later describe him as, quote, an angry young boy, which feels like the understatement of the century. When another neighbor asked Sean why he took his rage out on innocent garbage can lids, he reportedly said it was because he didn't have a girlfriend. Poor Sean's love life, or lack thereof, was apparently trash can smashingly frustrating. His budding criminal career officially started at 17 years old, though nothing major at first, just the usual menu of youthful mischief, traffic violations, DUIs, possession of marijuana, and contempt of court. But even then, the seeds of something far darker were clearly being planted, and those seeds were about to grow into a nightmare. When Sean turned 30, his life veered straight off the rails and into the abyss. Still living at home with his mom, Sean dabbled in odd jobs. Emphasis on odd because he couldn't hold one down for very long. Instead, he spent most of his time growing a pornography collection that could only be described as concerning. Meanwhile, Yvonne was thriving. She landed a new job in Atlanta and decided it was time to leave her 30-year-old man-child to fend for himself. Big mistake. Sean didn't use his newfound independence to, get his act together. Instead, Yvonne had to regularly send him money just so he could scrape by. This financial lifeline did not soothe Sean's mounting resentment, though. To him, his mom's move was abandonment, plain and simple. His reaction? Standing at his windows in the dead of the night and screaming into the void, terrifying the neighbors. Then, in 1992, Sean's antics got even creepier. A neighbor caught him peeping through their window. When confronted, Sean calmly explained that he was just looking for his cat. Sure, a likely story. From that point on, the neighborhood collectively kept track of him like a hawk looking for a mouse. But not Terry Lamone. To Terry, Sean was a charming young man who treated her with respect. They started dating, and while Terry found Sean's disinterest in sex a little odd, she didn't think much of it. What she didn't realize was that Sean's lack of interest in the bedroom was directly tied to his much more sinister hobbies. Thanks to the rise of the internet, Sean discovered an endless buffet of disturbing content. Rape, murder, dismemberment, you name it. And it didn't stop there. In a particularly chilling moment, Sean shared pictures of dead women with Terry. Shocked, but inexplicably unfazed, Terry brushed it off, and they continued their relationship for another decade. She couldn't have known that Sean's fascination with violent imagery wasn't just an obsession, it was the blueprint for what was to come. According to Sean Vincent Gillis, his killing spree began for a simple, almost laughable reason. He was stressed. Most people under stress might binge watch TV or take a walk, but not Sean. His version of stress relief was breaking into the home of 82-year-old Ann Bryan, a resident of an upscale retirement community in Baton Rouge, with the intention of raping her. When Ann screamed, Sean decided that raping her was too much trouble, so instead, he stabbed her. Not once, not twice, over 50 times. Ann Bryan, a woman who had likely suffered life's ups and downs with grace and strength, was brutally murdered by a man who claimed he was simply overwhelmed. Sean fled the scene, leaving behind a crime so horrific it shocked even seasoned investigators. Unfortunately, it was only the beginning for Sean. For years, Sean went on to leave a trail of carnage across Baton Rouge, a series of murders that showcased not only his brutality, but his dark, twisted humor. Former DA Prim Burns recalled one victim found posed on her back near a dead-end sign. Quote, "Which I thought was his humor in a very sick kind of way. Dead end," Burns explained. One of Sean's most chilling kills was that of 52-year-old Hardy Schmidt in 1999. Hardy was out jogging when Sean spotted her, and for reasons that only make sense in the black hole of his mind, he decided to have her. Over the next 3 weeks, he obsessively stalked her until the opportunity arose. Sean ran Hardy down with his car like she was roadkill, then used heavy-duty plastic wire to drag her into the vehicle. What followed was as depraved as it gets. He raped and murdered her, leaving her body in the trunk of his car for 2 days before dumping her, like garbage, into the bayou. And yet, Sean was not done. His 8th and final known victim, 43-year-old Donna Bennett Johnson, would be the one who led authorities to his door. Donna's body was discovered in a drainage canal in Baton Rouge, and the sheer brutality of this crime was almost beyond comprehension. Sean had raped her and then mutilated her body in ways that were grotesque, even by his standards. Her breasts were slashed, a tattoo on her thigh was gouged out, and her left arm had been severed at the elbow. It was Donna's murder that finally ended Sean's reign of terror, but only after years of death and destruction. Sean Vincent Gillis may have started killing because of stress, but what he left behind was a city that would never forget the horrors of his so-called relief. Once investigators wrapped their heads around the fact that Baton Rouge wasn't haunted by just one serial killer, they revisited Donna Bennett Johnson's crime scene with fresh eyes and a new determination to find this second predator. There, in the muck and chaos of the drainage canal, they discovered something crucial: tire tracks. It wasn't just any ordinary set of tracks. These belonged to a specific tire model that, as luck or karma would have it, had only been manufactured for a short 3-year window. Even better, only 90 sets had been sold in Baton Rouge. That's not exactly a needle in the haystack. It's more like finding a neon sign pointing directly to your suspect. With this lead in hand, detectives followed the trail until they arrived at Sean Vincent Gillis's doorstep. Calm and polite, because of course he was, Sean agreed to provide a DNA sample, and that's where his story started to unravel. The DNA was a match. Sean's genetic calling card had been left at multiple assault and murder scenes, tying him to a string of unspeakable crimes. But what truly nailed him was that investigators found his computer next. Sean's hard drive was a digital horror show. Among the 45 pictures of Donna Bennett Johnson's mutilated body were countless other photos, images of previous victims, some of those unknown to the police, others whose stories hadn't even come to light yet. It wasn't just a confession, it was a grotesque scrapbook of his atrocities, laid bare in the cold, unfeeling glow of his monitor. Sean Gillis wasn't just guilty, he was methodically documenting his evil, as if preserving it for posterity. And that computer, more than anything else, sealed his fate. Sean Vincent Gillis was slapped with several counts of first-degree murder, but even from behind bars, he couldn't resist feeding his dark, twisted ego. In letters sent from prison to a friend of Donna Johnson's, Sean offered up chilling, almost casual confessions that read like they were plucked straight from a horror novel. Quote, "She was so drunk, it only took about a minute and a half to succumb to unconsciousness and then death. Honestly, her last words were, 'I can't breathe.' I still puzzle over the post-mortem dismemberment and cutting. There must have been something deep in my subconscious that really needs this kind of macabre action." End quote. If Sean thought his prison pen pal musings were going to stay private, he was dead wrong. These letters were introduced in court, turning the final screw in his defense into an iron spike. Unsurprisingly, the jury didn't take kindly to this graphic and disturbingly introspective admission. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. Today, Sean Vincent Gillis resides at Louisiana State Penitentiary, where he will likely die. There, he spends his days doing the one thing he can't escape, living with himself. A man who claimed stress drove him to murder now has a lifetime to sit in solitude and reflect on the horrors he inflicted on others. Baton Rouge may never fully heal from the terror Sean and his ilk unleashed, but at least for now, the streets are free from one more monster. And Sean, well, he'll rot away in the shadows, just where he belongs. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, if you're a new listener, make sure you hit subscribe. If you're an OG listener, follow on social media. That way you'll be more up to date with what's happening with the podcast. And if you are following on social media, you'll know that I finally got unlazy, and at the urging of a bunch of you, I have updated the merch shop. It's just me doing all this, so sometimes I just don't have enough time to cover everything, and some things get pushed to the back burner. That was one of them. So finally, yesterday, I updated the merch shop. So if you go to 10minutemurder.com, up in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see a little button that says store. If you click that button, you can get 10-Minute Murder merch. Now, if you want something that doesn't have the logo on it, there's stuff there. If you want something that does have the logo on it, the new updated 10-Minute Murder logo, the official logo, it's there as well. So 10minutemurder.com, the merch store is live and updated. And that's going to do it. That's your story for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.